I'm Michelle.
And I'm Jenna.
And we're Gerard and Bellavander. We love creating over-the-top fantasy worlds and including personal memories or little Easter eggs hidden in our photos.
We're a photography and creative direction couple that works with brands all over the world from our studio here in Detroit.
We're always drawing from movies, pop culture, and nostalgia to influence our product and food photography sets. Our personal projects like Sunday Cinema and Scenes from Quarantine have connected us with new clients and photo editors, bonding us over our love of nostalgia.
We've built a motel room, a 90s childhood bedroom, mid-century modern dinner parties, airplane interiors, and a summer camp for food fights, all in our studio. In this course, we're going to teach you about how we take our love for vintage props and combine them with modern pieces and products. We'll show you some simple techniques to bring the past and present together for product photography. We're going to walk you through a product test shoot with 3 different monochromatic scenes. Through our set design, prop selection, and styling, each scene will have a different narrative, featuring a different product. After the course, you can find us on Instagram at Gerard Bellavander, so please reach out if you have any questions. We're happy to help.
Hit us up. Slide into my DMs.
Okay, let's start by talking about props. So the right props can draw the viewer into your world. And by the props that we choose here, whether they're vintage or modern, we're telling a part of the story and we're making sure that we're communicating something about the narrative or the product or the setting that we're in. So props can also help you shape your light by creating shadows or by reflecting or refracting light like these glasses. And even if your prop isn't in the scene, like up here, we had a glass pitcher just outside of the frame and we had the light shining through it to create these interesting shadows. Here we have the lace and it's creating this nice pattern on the background, and even the pattern that's being created from the tray here just adds a little bit something extra to this composition. So we live in Detroit where there's no prop houses. Our in-person shopping options aren't amazing, and we do often use Amazon, eBay, and Etsy for specialty items. But we realized it's important for us to start our own prop collection, buying items that inspire us and hanging on to them until the right shoot came along. For the type of work that we wanted to do, it was important that we started collecting these items over time so that when I wanted to do a personal project, a test shoot, or a client shoot, I had all of these items to pull from and to start with. So here's some of the photos of our collection that we've acquired over the last 4 years. Because we work with food a lot in our photos, we do have a lot of dishware and tabletop items. And so here are some of our tabletop items organized by color. Here's some of our specialty silverware. These are some of our favorite pieces, some of the pieces that have the most character. We have a lot of objects that are found in nature, like rocks, moss, and shells. And these make their way into tiny landscapes or just part of our still life scenes. They're really great for products and small items like jewelry. These are all kitchen items that were very cheap and add so much character. The spice canisters I can usually get by the handful for $1 or $2 at estate sales. The netting, packaging for the fruit, I always save when I buy fruit, but I also got some of this from the scrap store. And the pot holders and dish towels, these are also usually fairly cheap at estate sales. I dig through all of the kitchen drawers and sometimes they're like 50 cents or $1. Here are a few of the different categories of plates and dishware that we look for. We've got your modern ceramic, and these are our newest pieces from places like Crate and Barrel and West Elm. Milk glass, which always photographs beautifully, and most of this I find at estate sales or thrift stores. The vintage pottery also came from estate sales and thrift stores. And then transferware is almost always a thrift store find, and you can usually find this fairly cheap. We also collect a lot of toys and games. This is something that's really personal to our style, but a deck of cards is a useful prop in a tabletop scene or a still life scene too as well. I love going through the junk drawers, the vanity drawers, and the desk drawers at estate sales. I find some real treasures here, and again, they're usually very cheap. Okay, so when I started thinking about the kind of props that we buy and that we look for, I realized that most of them can be narrowed down into two categories: versatile props and character props. These aren't like industry standard categories or anything, but when I considered the most simplified way that we make decisions when it comes to sourcing and purchasing props, it really just came down to these two categories. So let's talk about each one really quick. So versatile items. Moodlier is a great example of a versatile piece. They can form my set design as a foundation, or they can act as a display piece for a product. They can be part of the decor. They can be rotated and turned upside down and even painted. So I'll be able to use these pieces across many sets of many different styles. Props that could be considered versatile are ones that don't communicate a specific era or a style, and that in the right setting, they could maybe look vintage or modern. And the designs aren't usually too ornate or unique, but we'll go over a couple of examples. Character props are the most fun to shop for. They usually communicate something about your story or your setting, and they have a more unique design or a clear style. They could be vintage or modern. In this case, I have some examples of vintage character props. Just by looking at these three sets of items, you get a pretty good sense of like what setting they would live in or what person would be using these. Here are a few examples of versatile versus character props. Let's start with a category like dishware and tabletop. The items on the left tend to be more neutral in color and design, making them more versatile. Some of their shapes also allow them to be used in unconventional ways. Like this white bowl could be flipped upside down and it could be used as a base for a product. These flat plates with the small lip around them could be used as something like a makeup tray. This little collection right here is actually a set of modern plates, but they're designed to look like classic hotel or diner plates. So these are kind of timeless in their own way. So all of these could live in a variety of scenes and be paired with new or vintage props fairly easily. As you move toward the center, there's more bold colors and some subtle patterns. They're a little less versatile than the ones on the left, but they bring more personality to your photos with their colors and textures and more unique designs. And the items leaning towards the far right are all very strong character pieces. They're clearly communicating a setting or an era, like these tropical glasses in smoked glass and yellow palm pattern. They feel like something you'd see in a basement bar in the 70s. And some of these are really intended for one type of food, like the chip and dip hat or the shrimp boat. These would make great kitschy photo props. They have so much character all on their own that you could put them on a plain colored backdrop and still communicate the setting or the character. After using them once or twice, though, you're probably going to want to cycle these types of props out. So let's look at a category that by nature already has more character to it. These are all decor or personal items. So when we're looking at props like decor, here are some of the qualities we're looking for. The props on the left are again more neutral toned and they can be used in multiple ways. The cake stands could be used as is, or they could be placed underneath some fabric to create some height variations in your photo. Plants are pretty timeless. They can be modern or vintage, but they could also be used outside of your photo and you could shine light through them to create shadows. In the middle, we have some more common hand props or personal props like clocks, phones, and sunglasses. These clocks have personality, but the design and the tones of color allow them to span a wide range of scenes. So while they're vintage, they could actually still work well in a modern photo as well. And then as you move over to the items on the far right, all of these have very strong characters. You could determine a lot about the setting based on these individual props. So when shopping for props, consider how useful the item will be in the long run. If its uses are endless, it's worth it to spend more to have a great reusable piece in your collection. And if it's so unusual, if it has such a strong character that you'll only be able to use it one time, just make sure it's not costing you too much. Okay, so getting into modern and vintage. For our photo shoot in this course, we wanted to focus on mixing modern and vintage props and finding a good balance between the two. In the shoot we worked on with Bando, we combined their products with vintage touches. And their products have a lot of personality, so it was important to choose vintage items that fit within that theme but not distract from the products that we were featuring. In this yellow photo, we have vintage items like this cup, the yellow travel clock, the salt and pepper shakers, and the juicer. And in the green, we have this die. We have a mushroom napkin holder. There's a vintage vase here that you can only see a little bit. And this is actually a toilet butt brush holder from the 80s that we've made into a plant pot. So in both of these sets, most of the vintage items are fairly common objects. And they're just nondescript enough that they're going to fall in the middle of that versatile versus character scale. They have enough personality to help communicate what we're trying to say with each of these images and who we're trying to represent in both of these themes, but they're not going to distract from what we're trying to showcase. Okay, so here's a completely different kind of shoot. I love mixing vintage and modern dishware and tabletop items, and it just adds a bit more realism to the scene, because even if the food is perfectly styled, I just think that seeing different kinds of silverware and plates and mismatched drinking glasses is something that most people can relate to in their own home. So there's not really any rules to mixing modern and vintage. So we thought the best way would be to walk you through 3 photo shoots and talk through our thought process while we're styling. So the last thing to talk about right now is the best places to find props. Okay, so we already talked a little bit about Moodlier and their pieces being very versatile and useful in many different ways. But depending on the type of photography that you do, you might find that some bundles are more useful to you than others. They have a great guide to this on their website, so I recommend checking this out right here. Thrift and antique stores. We check out thrift stores regularly. We've hit everything in our area and figured out which ones have the best prices and the type of items that we look for. So we're often driving like 30 to 40 minutes to the good Salvation Army, but it's worth it. Antique stores are generally for the specialty pieces since they tend to be pricier, but I've still bought some great pieces that are worth the extra cost. Flea markets and garage sales. These could be great depending on your area or hit or miss like they are here. I generally have better luck with thrift stores, but garage sales do usually have way better deals. Estate sales. This is another big one for us. If they have the word dig or picker in there, expect it to be a mess and you're going to be searching through things, but you're going to find some great deals and some really unique items. So we also like to look for ones that say bag sale. It's usually $5 per bag on the last day, and it's whatever is left in whatever you can fit into a plastic grocery bag. Free stuff Facebook groups. Usually these are called like buy nothing plus the name of your city, and we've picked up old books, a vintage fondue set, and old tabletop surfaces, all from just free groups. Facebook Marketplace is great for specific items. I like to turn on keyword searches for props that I'm on the lookout for, and then I turn on the search for free items within a certain radius. And so it's a much better deal than eBay or Etsy for vintage items. Speaking of Etsy and eBay, this is my go-to when I need something very specific, like a 90s ashtray from Bob's Big Boy or a 3D printed sandworm. Retail stores, when I need new items, I can always go to Target, World Market, West Elm, Anthropology, and then of course there's always Amazon. Some things I've bought at dollar stores. Birthday candles for our Maximalist cake shoot, TV dinner trays, desk accessories, and again, find the good ones. Just we love the mom and pop owned ones that have been around forever. Okay, so creative reuse centers or recycling centers, donation centers that have retail stores. This is where we get all of our old fabric, wallpaper, all these small toys and shells and tiles, and just endless other items. We've actually found so much here that we created a whole I Spy book based on the items that we found in the store. And finally, just borrow from friends and family. let them know you're going to happily accept donations when they're cleaning out their basement. So we've had people drop off old slow cookers and phones that ended up being in photo shoots. And when you're shopping, keep in mind that when buying props, you're probably not going to need more than 2 or 3 of the same glass. Buy 2 plates or 1 fork. Stay away from full sets unless it's an amazing deal and totally worth it. Those mismatched pieces are generally going to be the best price too. So remember, invest in versatile, high-end pieces that you can use time and time again. And start the search for narrative character pieces that are going to make up your stories. So now that you know how we source our props, let's talk about the concept for our shoot. Concept and set design. For the concept of this shoot, we wanted to design each scene around one of Moodlier's bundles. The Teensy bundle in mint green, the Bumpy bundle in glacier, and the fluted columns bundle in their white primer. So we wanted to take 2 items that we knew paired well together already, Moodlier pieces and products, and imagine them in a completely different way. You can see that Moodlier pieces are great for building sculptural still life displays. And we wanted to do something a little bit different and imagine them in more of a home setting as decor, where the setting looked more environmental than a studio backdrop. We really wanted to do something with candles because we've seen how well candles and Moodlier products can go together. And we wanted to choose something that didn't feel like an obvious product, and it could even be considered a prop itself if it were in another brand's photo shoot. So we chose these botanical goods candles because they had a wide variety of these fun, different shapes and with a lot of personality, and the colors were varied, and it gave us a lot of choices to pick from. So my goal for this test shoot was to bridge the gap between our personal work and our product work. If you look at our personal work, you can see that a lot of it's very maximalist, it's very environmental, and on the other end, our product and our brand work has been a little bit more minimal, and they have more of a studio look to them, with a few exceptions. But when you're planning your shoots, it's always a good idea to look for gaps that you might have in your portfolio. So I know a lot of people like to choose a popular brand for their test shoots, but I prefer to choose something without an obvious brand name. Mainly because if I pick something a little bit more generic, I think it could be easier for a potential brand to imagine their product within my work. Test shoots are a great chance for us to try out new techniques and styles without the pressure of a commercial shoot. And it's a chance to suggest to both new and old clients some new ways to work with us. For the shoot, I know that I want the scene to be a little bit more maximalist. I want to include some of the vintage props and elements that show up in so much of our personal work. Let's move on to the concept. So because I knew I was using the Moodlier pieces as my foundational base for the images, I wanted to let the pieces guide my concept a little bit. Because I love the 80s, I immediately thought of the way columns were used in 80s interiors and furniture design. But the 80s and 90s are my comfort zone, and I wanted to do a test shoot that shows how our process can be applied to a wide variety of products and scenes. And the candles I wanted to focus on were not really going to fit into these 80s and 90s concepts. I went back to the basics, and I'm looking again at the fluted columns. They're classical design and elegant, but for our style, I wanted to combine it with some kitsch. So one of our past projects actually ended up inspiring this direction. This is part of that I Spy style project that I talked about, and it's kind of like what your grandma's dresser might look like, with all these old perfume bottles, costume jewelry, lace, little fancy soaps that you're not allowed to use. And I could see how we might be able to do a modern take on this and mix in some of these vintage items. And thinking back on the candles, I knew that there were a couple of candles from this company that would work within this type of scene. I started searching for photos of vanities, the kind of vanity you might have in your room when you were a teenager, where it's a mix of makeup and jewelry, school supplies, or everything that you collected that you just felt was like an expression of your personality. And then that kind of evolved into our idea of an adult bedroom vanity, a place that's for self-care and self-expression, reclaiming some of that past version of yourself, but maybe as the more refined person that you grew into. The scene takes place in present day, and so the mix of vintage and modern pieces should represent that. And I could immediately see how the fluted columns could fit into the scene, leaning a little more toward Marie Antoinette or even cottagecore. I created a mood board based off of that idea. And my mood board photos were a little dreamy, very maximalist scenes. I like the pastel pinks and the whites, and maybe even some of these like gold accents. The cherub candle would fit in perfectly on this vanity. So now that I knew I wanted to explore this vanity idea, I had to think about the other two bundles and how they would fit into this concept. With these Moodle pieces, I kept coming back to them being kind of cute and bubbly. And this little triple mound guy reminds me of Cloud. And the wet ripple one is obviously like a water surface. It was also reminding me of the mermaid obsession that I had growing up and of Polly Pocket clamshells for some reason, something about this color. I decided that this vanity was going to be the most like my own personality, less focused on jewelry and makeup, more on tiny toys, notebooks, pencils, and other desktop items I would have surrounded myself with. My mood board includes lots of whimsical items and toys, candy, and it still has a bit of that like kind of dreamy quality to it. And I really liked in this photo how the purple tones paired with the blues. I decided to add a purple periwinkle into my color palette, just to break up the blue a little. In this scene, the plants were actually the driving element. I like the idea of covering a vanity in plants like a little oasis, so I actually worked backwards in this case of how the Moodle pieces could fit into my scene. These pieces are actually smaller than the other two sets that I chose, but I loved the variation in the shapes. Their size and the unique features gave me a lot of ideas on the way to use them. This zigzag shape here, it can be used standing up as you see it, but it could also be turned on its side and used as a staircase. And then that made me think of this little piece here as a bridge. Now I'm thinking of this as kind of a miniature scene. And while that doesn't fit my vanity concept at all, it does make me think a little bit of a terrarium. So maybe I'll use these Moodle pieces as tiny displays for crystals and rocks, and this will be a more spiritual form of self-care in this scene. And there's two great candles that fit within the scene, and one of them is the mushroom goddess. So I want to include more elements like feminine features into the scene as well. So we're focusing on a lush greenery and a spiritual connection to nature. My pieces are mint green, and I know I'm going to have plants, so I think I'm going to have these two different shades of green that will keep my scene from being too monochrome. So I've landed on these products for our test shoot, and we have our mood boards and our products, and we're going to move forward into the set design. To keep things affordable, I decided to pick one vanity as the base and change only the styling and the props. These wood tones I thought were just a little too dark, and they kind of wouldn't fit the brighter and dreamier aesthetic that we're going for, so I decided the base should be white, or at very least a lighter neutral color that could work with all three of the color palettes that I chose. I looked at trifold mirrors that could be set on top of a desk or a dresser, and I also considered vanities with attached mirrors. By including a mirror in our set, we'll have to consider what you're going to see reflected in it. We don't want to see our studio or the camera, so we want to make sure our mirror isn't too large with too much surface area to cover. We ended up finding this $10 mirror on Facebook Marketplace in that classic trifold style. It was perfect. I couldn't believe we found something so close to what we had pictured. And then we just borrowed a desk from Jenna's sister. It actually had a detached mirror with it, but it was so large and it didn't make sense for what we were doing. So we're just using the bottom piece. For our backgrounds, behind the desk, we're going to use some sheer fabric to act as curtains. We're going to shine a light through the fabric to look like sunlight. And to hide our studio, we're going to hang wallpaper across from our set, so the reflection in the mirror is only going to show wallpaper and make it feel more like it's a room and it's a real environment. Okay, so we talked a little bit about prop ideas for each theme, and I had a mood board where I pulled some examples and I had a few items in mind. But here I'm just listing out anything else that I can look for when I'm shopping for props. When shopping for props, think about things like scale. How are the items going to fit together in your scene? Making sure that you're choosing items of various sizes. You don't want everything to be the exact same size of prop. And you want to make sure too that your props are going to fit the product that you're showing. How are they going to all fit together? Color. So we're working with mostly monochrome here, but we don't want everything to be the exact same shade. Also, because that would just be very difficult. So we want to break it up a little with other colors and neutral tones. So consider how the color of your props fit into your scene. Does it make sense for the tone and the story? Modern versus vintage. So for this course, we're focusing on finding that balance between modern and vintage. When we place all of our props together, does it feel balanced or does it feel more like it's leaning toward one style? When you're shopping for props, make sure you're pulling from both categories. Versatile versus character. Do your props have a good mix of the two? If you have too many character props, they could be competing for the spotlight. Your story. The most important thing to remember, do your prop choices fit the narrative? If they're not helping to communicate the story that you're trying to tell, it's probably best to leave them out. And finally, your style. Choose props that speak to you. You want your own style to come out in these photos, and your style could be more minimal than ours. So if you're including less in your photo, it's even more important to edit yourself. If you only have 5 props in a photo rather than 35, each of those 5 props should be there for a clear reason. Here's a collection of props that we ended up for each color and theme. We pulled from our own prop collection as well, so we collected anything that might work, but we're going to narrow these down a lot. We spray painted some cheap items from the thrift store to make sure we had enough options in our color palette as well. And here's what we ended up narrowing down and compiling for each set. We have our Modelier pieces and our products. We have our backgrounds and all of our favorite props. All the extra props that we had went into a separate bin down below, just in case we needed to pull something different when we were on set. We're focusing on styling in this course, but we did want to talk briefly about the lighting we're using. So we know that we want an overall dreamy summer afternoon quality of light with a little bit of fake sunlight coming in through the windows. To achieve this, we're going to use 2 Aperture 300D2 video lights. One has a reflector modifier, and we're going to use that to shine through the soft sheer fabrics to kind of create like a sunlight look. And the other one has a light dome, which is just a soft box, and that's going to create a soft light over the whole scene. We do use both strobes and video light in our studio, depending on the type of shoot we're doing. But for this still life, we're going to use video light to make it easier to see exactly how our light will look in the final image. So now that you've learned a little bit more about how we source props and what we look for, how we come up with our concepts and our set design, and everything we did to get ready for this shoot, in the next lesson, you're actually going to see us on set and styling our shoot.
Okay, welcome to our set. We are keeping it nice and simple. We are using a desk that we borrowed from my sister. It's kind of a vanity. It's got fun drawers down there, and a mirror that we got off Facebook Marketplace for $10. And we're going to be using the wallpaper to put across from the mirror so that it feels a little bit more like a room and you're not just seeing our whole studio reflected in the mirror. And some just scraps of lace and fabric that we're going to hang in the back here and shoot our light through to make it look a little bit more like a real room, like real sunlight filtering through. And we also have an apple box in front because we don't have a chair. We're just going to cover this with like some fabric or something just to make it look like a little stool, and again, give a little bit more of a sense of environment. Make it look a little more like a room, not just a studio. Our camera is going to be connected to our laptop running Capture One, and that's going to transmit a live image of our photo while we're styling so we can see exactly what our final photo will look like.
First, we're going to place our Modelier pieces on set as foundational elements to begin building our scene. We typically begin scenes like this with our largest pieces and products, and this helps guide the composition instead of filling the frame with secondary items.
The right-hand corner of the frame looks a little empty, showing a little too much wallpaper, so we're going to add a second layer of lace. We're using Live View and Capture One to set our focus from our laptop.
Let's double this up.
With scenes that have a lot of elements, we like to work in layers to add personality to the scene.
Get some fake drawer pulls.
We use small spray painted decorative items to customize the furniture for each scene.
And we're just sticking these on with museum putty. We're gonna use this for our little bench seat.
Take off my own rings. Place them in here.
Where is all of our makeup? Those are our modern pieces. Okay, so we're just starting with a few initial props in the scene, and we're trying to get a sense of like how they'll all fit together, which ones are maybe a little too vintage or too modern. We're trying to find that balance between vintage and modern. So we want to make sure that this candle is kind of either maybe up top here or maybe down here. We want to keep it kind of centered so that your eye is still drawn to the product.
At first we placed the product on the highest pillar, but on second glance we moved it down to the pillar that was an appropriate size, bringing it closer towards the center of the image and making it more of a focal point.
And this one feels too much like the product now, so I'm gonna move this. So we're using our Moodelier pieces to kind of create these little groupings for all of this person's makeup or display items, and kind of create a lighter section of the scene that your eye is drawn to. Do you want to add some of your gold necklaces back here?
Yeah, can you hand me the gold?
And let's just like kind of layer them right here. Maybe we want to have the mirror a little bit more over this way. When you're looking in the mirror, you can see that the wallpaper is reflected, but I have a gap here, so let's see. The gap is right here. So if I move it over, will you tell me when I've blocked it?
Think that's good? Yeah? I do think you have to skew that a little bit.
Yes. So because of our camera angle and lens distortion, it looks like the wallpaper is crooked in the scene. So we're gonna purposely skew it in real life so that on camera it appears straight and the lines are actually straight.
We're going to continue placing gold jewelry. These pieces play both to current trends, but they still have a vintage energy. Adding the little makeup sponges as well as the vintage compact pad into the colored coupe glass makes them almost feel like candy. The owner of this space would be a big fan of Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette.
And this makeup right here is looking a little too messy and cluttered, so we're gonna find a better way to rearrange this on set. And since these are real modern products, I'm just turning them so that I don't see the labels because I don't want to confuse the viewer about what the product is in this photo. So we wanted this picture to be a little bit indulgent, so we included a bunch of candy and cakes.
This is how you style.
This is how we style. And we're just gonna pour them all right in here.
So maybe put one here.
I'm gonna place the cookies around them.
Yeah.
Let's turn this around because that back part isn't very cute. And we're just gonna alternate these. And then we'll keep one on this pink plate down here. And we're gonna see if we can rotate his feather so we can see it.
I'm gonna take a test shot.
Yes, please.
All right, do we have the butterflies are intersecting with the bird's head? Yeah, they're intersecting a little
Can
funny.
you zoom in on that spot?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm just gonna back this up and rotate it a little bit. There we go, it's better. Can you still see this down here? Yes.
Yeah, you can.
I don't want it to catch the light. There we go. All right, let's put in our larger dessert. Let's see the best side of this. Looking for the cutest raspberries. There we go.
We have roses that we're going to place. We got these because we liked the color variation, but I actually think the more dusty pink makes more sense. You'll see that the orange is just a little too orange. I like the bottom, but I don't like this as much.
We kept our flower choices old-fashioned, very classic, baby's breath and roses.
So this one right here is looking a little bit cluttered.
Yeah.
We're gonna bring this out in front. Let's tuck this in a little bit more. And I'm actually gonna set it on the bracelet just to give a little separation between the background and this clear glass dish.
So we went from this to this.
Looks good.
Yeah? Okay.
All right,
so
we're gonna add in something on this spot right here. Go back to live view. So this spot right here is looking kind of empty compared to everything else, especially with just the one necklace. So we're gonna set this in coming on the side. I'm just trying to find nice gaps between the things going on in the foreground here. I can't really see this back here, these buttons and these, so I'm gonna move them out a little bit. Right about there. Do you see them a little bit more now?
You do.
Let's do the same thing with the buttons. Let's take a couple out. Can you see her right here?
You cannot.
Okay, let me move her over then. What about right now?
You can see her.
All right. I wanted to make sure that she got in the photo.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the other thing I want to look at is the reflection in the mirror of the candle right here.
Yeah.
So when you zoom in on that section, are we seeing the back of the candle?
No. Well, you do have to rotate him a little bit.
So I think these flowers, the way that the vase is reflecting is a little bit busy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tuck it back further. Can you still see it a little bit there, or is it just too hidden?
No, you can see it, but I do think then you have to rotate the
I'm gonna rotate the candle
angel, yeah.
so that they're facing the light a little bit more.
Yeah.
And can you see the shape of the wings and the reflection?
I believe so, yeah. You see it a little bit more.
At this point, you'll start to see our final touches, shifting items back and forth and seeing what works. For this series of photos, we're looking for controlled chaos, telling a story without overwhelming the product. For this scene, we begin by switching out our hanging lace with a different texture to fit our theme. The beaded curtain and wallpaper are more playful and blue-toned.
All right, so what we need to do is if you want to go behind that mirror and adjust it.
Yep.
Keep going. You're almost there. See, we're trying to line that up. There we go. So the base of each of these scenes are these moullier pieces, so we want to kind of figure out where these are going to go and how they're going to display our product.
The moullier bumpy bundle is very versatile. You'll see us turning it around, playing with all the different ways we could possibly use them.
So my original idea for this was to put it inside the drawer and it would maybe be peeking out, but it's not going to fit in this drawer. And then I realized that it's actually perfectly the width of this drawer. So now I'm kind of picturing it as this kind of like weird tray that slides out where you have like that extra little desk space, but it's just kind of a wavy, bumpy version. So we're just gonna cheat this by putting some apple boxes underneath. Let me see on the screen. I wanted to have a little bit more because I don't want to see this black space, so put this smaller box on top. Now let's see. There we go, that's perfect.
I like that. You do
So-
see a little bit of the
I see a
wood.
little bit of the wood, so I'm gonna adjust my camera angle so I don't see that. And I wanna make sure I'm not seeing it over on this side, and I'm not. And we're not even gonna see our fake stool in this one, so I'm gonna take it out. So I can see in the background of my live view that I'm still seeing this blank spot, right?
So I gotta move the fabric over.
So the fabric or the whole thing needs to move back a little bit more towards the
Just
wall.
the fabric.
Okay, so I think this is a good starting point for the moullier props, and I want to start setting in my products. And I have 2 candles for this one, so I'm probably going to group them together. We wanted to do a little bit of color variation in this scene and have some blue and purple. In the first scene, we had pink and white. Well, we really want to be careful because something like this is drawing the eye because of its pattern. And I don't know if this one is going to work in this scene. We have our knockoff Polly Pocket because a real Polly Pocket was too expensive.
Here we're placing objects, filling the frame with narrative items. The person driving this narrative isn't overly girly, but still loves cute things and wants their space to be fun.
Let's do a blue because I don't want the 2 whites right next to each other. So this area here is feeling a little bit blank, and since last time we had that nice little detail of like that decor that we had spray painted, I wanted to include something on this one that feels appropriate for the theme. So this is just a little plastic shell. So here's one of our vintage items. It's actually a Shawnee Pottery little ashtray with a squirrel on it. But because it's the right color and it's got all these rounded edges and with the cute little animal, it's really
I
on
like it right
theme.
here.
But you can see how when we set this here, this intersection back here makes
Yeah.
it hard to see the outline of the squirrel. So we definitely don't want that right behind it, because as soon as we move it, you can now clearly see the shape of the animal.
I like this too much to leave it back here, but we still haven't found a good spot for it yet.
So I like this piece because it's one of our stronger vintage pieces in this scene, and I think without it, it almost all appears modern.
Do we have something to put inside that is not a picture?
So we could put cup inside. So let's start playing with this arrangement.
Let me take a test shot like this.
We moved the candle down to the desk. It was getting a little lost in the frame amongst the other pieces. This is still a product shoot. Moving it forward helps keep the focus on the candle. Once we moved it down, we saw the clock had to be shifted so it wouldn't intersect.
I like the idea of using something holographic and having that blend in with some of the vintage items. I don't know if it'll fit, but it might be a nice display for the candles.
Maybe we can put this one on here. This one might be a little too tall. Well, let's see.
Maybe we want a step shorter.
And I'm just looking at the way that, as I move it, what's nice about the continuous lighting is that I can see the way that this light from the acrylic is being thrown. When you turn it this way, you're getting more of the reflection and you're seeing a lot more of the blue and purple tones. But when I turn it this way, I'm gonna get a lot more yellow and orange tones. So we're gonna keep it turned this way to stay on our color theme. Now compared to our last photo, I'm seeing that we have a lot of blank space up in this area and even back here.
Let me take a test shot for you so you can really compare them.
Okay, why don't you pull those two up next to each other so we can talk about it and capture one.
Comparing these two scenes, we're obviously still early in the styling process of the blue scene, but we can see we're still missing some height and interest in the top, middle, and down the left side. Of course, we don't want to match the styling too closely in each image, just enough to keep the sets cohesive so that they can live in a series. We were having trouble finding the perfect place for some of these items on set, so we decided to pull them out and try a few other prop options.
We need to create some height here to make it similar to the other photo that we have. So let's try with the cup up here and then maybe put the pens inside of this cup.
You can see once we place the items, we're making small modifications, moving the pencils, repositioning the clock, seeing what works. Nothing too clunky or interfering with the overall composition. As a side note, you'll see on Capture One's live view that some parts of the scene don't appear to be fully in focus, but we are at f/16 and the final image, everything will be sharp.
Let's put this on here so that we have something else draping kind of down.
And then can I place these back down?
Place this back down behind the camera. And let's
Do you
put
like
that
it
all the way.
dangling on there?
I like it dangling.
I liked it so when it was sitting kind of on top.
Oh, sitting on top of the frame. Yeah,
distracting?
I like that. No, I like that.
Ah.
I have these little seashell stamps.
As soon as I got it to stay, I'm like, I hate it. I don't like it. I hate it. I'm leaving it like this. I hate it.
All right, well, let's see how we feel about it before you spend too much time on it.
You know
might end up
what?
moving things around.
You know what? I hate it. We're canceling it.
At this point, you can tell we are truly finding our way into the scene and beginning to compose, while still taking little breaks to play around and have fun with the toys.
So what I'm looking at is I don't want the swirl to intersect with the mirror. But it can be close.
I like the idea of those on the corner.
Kind of going with the curve of the piece.
I like that.
So this down here is a little crowded. Now we have to work on this again, because now we keep moving our candle around and we've kind of lost our focus. This double frame right here feels like too much, and I wanna swap it out with something else.
We've begun adding in little shells, keeping with the mermaid notes from our mood board. I love that the scene appears more modern than the last, but it's because the vintage details we selected blend so seamlessly. It's fun to let your eye wander to the unexpected items like the mug, the doll furniture, the wallpaper, and the ashtray.
So tuck the shell back in closer towards the bag.
Yeah, because I feel like it's intersecting with the candle too much.
Yes. Even a little bit more.
Kind of like this.
Turn it toward camera just slightly. All right. So because of maybe the way we have the candles placed now, I think that the beaded part should come out and around the front of where the little squishy guy is. Yeah, better.
Our last elements are some Japanese candy, little gummies and jellies. Since this is our third and final scene, we won't stop to explain what we're doing here. I'll just narrate a few key points. We're using the green patterned wallpaper and plants to provide texture like we did with the lace and beaded curtain, living within that structure that we created in the two previous images. The idea behind this image was a personal oasis, and we chose plants of various sizes to make composition a little easier. You'll notice the variety in sizes and shapes create a natural framing. Setting up our greenery like this, our goal was to make it appear as if nature was taking over and is growing out from behind the mirror. Plants coming in from everywhere, even from inside the drawers. Moonali's teensy bundle plays within the plant vanity like structures in a terrarium. It made us think of nature taking over the facade of a building. Our thought here was to use the ziggy piece, like stairs in the center of the image, a little unexpected shrine for personal items. We bring in vintage feminine touches with the green bird and repurposed hand to pair with the mushroom goddess and lotus candle. In each of these sets, there are several common themes. The main being that this is a personal space for self-care and self-expression. There are more literal connections, such as creatures, objects from nature, and jewelry. We moved the mushroom goddess to a small, elevated ring dish to give her height and pair the two candles together without intersecting. The curved moodle piece behind the product reframes it and punctuates it as a focal point. This last image is a space for special objects as well as self-care and self-reflection. The owner of this vanity would feel very aligned here. This thought process of asking ourselves who would be sitting here at each vanity has guided our styling choices throughout the shoot. Even though the small glass ashtray was vintage, it was a little too short and it wasn't reading vintage enough for our scene. We preferred the way the darker pattern bowl makes more of a vintage statement and mirrors the zodiac goblet on the right. Just like in the pink and blue scenes, you'll see us making small adjustments again, keeping the delicate balance of our composition.
We've loaded our photos into Lightroom and we're going to do some initial edits here before taking our photo into Photoshop. This was my final image from the pink and white scene, and I wanted to remind you of a few things and also talk about maybe some things I'm seeing in the photo that I could have changed on set. I really like the full photo uncropped. It's got all that detail, the maximalism, the I Spy look to it, so I think I'm going to leave it uncropped like this. But I want to talk about some different formats that I can use for different purposes. So we put so much work and detail into this one photo and this one scene that it's really helpful to have that cropping room so that you can make the most use out of an image that took you so much time. So the first thing we can do is simply just zoom in a little bit closer on the product itself. So now if I was posting this photo maybe to Instagram or somewhere where it's going to be smaller and I didn't want the product to get lost, this is just a good way to simply zoom in real quick on it and make sure that that product is front and center. If we go to something more extreme like 16:9, this also works. We've been styling all the way to the edges, so even all the way up to the top and all the way to the bottom, there's some nice details there to see in this crop. And we can even go to the other extreme and do a 16:9 horizontal format. So this would be maybe like the opener of their website. And it's also why it's important to pay attention to all these tiny details on set, because it might not be noticeable in the larger image, but once you crop into these different portions, you want to make sure it all makes sense and there's nothing distracting. Even if the photo is going to appear in different formats like that horizontal banner, we're always going to edit the entire image first and crop it last. That way we always have the full photo fully edited to use in whatever format we need. One more thing to talk about before we move to the editing. When you're on set and you have everything placed and you feel like your final image is perfect, and you like everything about it and you think you're done, just take your camera and move it to a different angle or height, or just change something around and get a couple of different options. Especially if you've built a scene as big as ours, you have so many different options for angles, and just get those extra images while you can. Here's just a couple of different options that we did after our first photo. This photo, I physically moved closer to the candle in the set. In this photo, I changed to a horizontal format and I got a lot closer to my subject. I'm also looking more down on the product and onto the vanity. There's a couple of things I'm noticing right away though now that I've changed my angle and gotten closer to the scene. We styled everything perfectly with that first image. We were watching everything on the screen and moving everything around until it all just fit together like puzzle pieces. As soon as I change my angle, you can see that some of the styling doesn't work as well as it did in the first image. The first area that I'm noticing is right back here in this corner. It kind of feels oddly empty compared to the rest of the scene, so my eye wants to be drawn this way. This jewelry box here maybe could have been rotated and brought a little bit closer. The butterflies, I wish I could see them a little bit more in the scene, so maybe I would have moved those so that they would be hanging out right around here instead. If you change your angle, just pay attention to these little details that you might need to change in your photo. So here's our blue scene. We have our first initial wider out image, and then we got a little bit closer to our candle, changed our angle just a little bit, and changed to a horizontal format. This is the photo we're going to be working with though. The green set also had a couple of differences that you didn't get to see us do on set. One of the things is this greenery around the corner here. We scaled back and made it much more minimal. In the first images, it was just too much. I really like how these all work together, and since we focus so much on getting it all right in camera, I think they look great and there's not a lot that I have to do before I post them. Just gonna make a few adjustments to the color, pull out a little bit of this yellow, bring down the highlights, bring the shadows up. I'm gonna play with the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders a little bit. Some of these purples are a little bit too purple for me. So this purple slider, you can see this makeup sponge here, how much it changes when I pull it over. So here's where it started. Let's pull it a little bit more into the pink range. The flower and the lace are still feeling a little peachy orange to me, so I'm gonna pull some of those oranges out. I'm gonna switch to luminance and pull the purple up to make that one a little bit brighter and not so dark. So turning my hue, saturation, and luminance sliders on and off. Those purples now are more in the pink tones. I'm just increasing the sharpening a little bit on my image. And I'm going to enable profile correction, which just takes out that tiny bit of distortion and vignetting that was happening around the corners. Let's move on to the blue. We're just going to do the same thing in this one. I didn't do a lot of heavy editing on these. Mostly I lightened up the shadows and brought down the highlights just a touch. Took out a little bit of that yellow color cast. And just played with that hue and saturation and luminance of some of the different colors to get it looking just a little bit more monochrome. From here I can take them into Photoshop and do my final editing. The first thing I want to do is bring up these shadows even more. I'm going to create a new curves adjustment layer. And I'm just going to pull up on the middle of this curve. While it's still selected on the mask, go to Image, Apply Image. By clicking on Invert, it's going to read the image and just pull up the shadows on that curve. I'm really taking out all the contrast in this image. The other thing I want to try, just because I'm playing around with kind of special effects here, is the color lookup. And I can click through each of these just using the down arrow on my keyboard. And each of these layers I can also set to different blending modes. And I can also just lower the opacity of them if I want a lighter effect. Let's try some of these different ones. Alright, I like this one. It just adds a little bit of dreaminess to it, and I've turned it all the way down to 37. I like this kind of softness that it's adding to the image, but let's enhance that even further. So by clicking on Control-Shift-Alt-E or Command-Shift-Alt-E. So this has created a new layer that is just everything below it merged together. So this is now kind of my base layer that I'm going to use for my blur. Okay, that adds a nice softness effect. I like it on the flowers here, but I don't want it on my candle, so I'm gonna add a mask and paint in with black. Make sure I'm at 100% up here. I like where this is at, so now I just want to go through and clean up any little scratches or anything distracting that I see. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-Alt-E again to create a new layer that I'm going to use for retouching. And we're just going to be using the patch tool and the healing brush for these. I don't see anything else I want to edit, so this should be my final image. I'm going to go through the next 2 images and do the exact same process of curves, color lookup, blur, and retouching. All right, so I've adjusted my curves, and I can actually go back to my pink photo and copy my color lookup by hitting Control C and coming back and hitting Control V. And now I have the same color lookup settings that I had on the previous image. Here are the 3 final images. Not a lot of heavy retouching. Some basic adjustments like curves, adding a color lookup, and adding a little bit of blur effect for ours because we wanted that dreamy quality. And then we just did some light retouching for anything that was distracting. We really hope this was helpful. We're still learning the best ways to communicate our process and show what we do. So if you have questions or if you feel like we skipped something, please reach out to us. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you. We have so much fun showing you what we do.